Mrs. Dalton inherited the place, and he came there to live when they were married. Why don't they speak to each other? And how long has that gone on? 20 years. My God. What a life. Do you know what started it? He used to be rather gay, I said carefully. It may have been something like that. Were they on good terms with the Lancasters? Very good. Rather formal, of course. We are rather formal here, you see, Inspector. We don't do much running back and forth. And she has the money? I think he has a little of his own. I really don't know. Now what about him and Margaret Lancaster? You needn't worry about telling, for we know anyhow. We know he was in his garage that afternoon working in a pair of old overalls over the engine of his car, and we know that those overalls have disappeared and he's got a new pair. That may not mean anything, of course. I'm telling you so you won't feel, well, too scrupulous. And we know he's been meeting the other woman. Why? Have you any idea? I never heard anything about him and Margaret Lancaster until you showed me that letter, Inspector. He was not satisfied, I knew. He sat with his eyes drilling into me, but at last he moved and spoke. All right, he said. Let's get on. Now what about the Lancasters? What about the way they got along together? How did the old gentleman like his stepdaughters? What about Mrs. Lancaster? Did she put up the money, like Mrs. Dalton, or did he? I tried my best, but they had been so long a part of my exterior life that I found it hard to detach myself. I really don't know, I said at last. Both of them were well off, I believe. They lived quietly always, even before she got sick. As a matter of fact, she had had bad health long before I was born. I suppose that's one reason why the girls never married. She didn't have a stroke or anything like that, you know. She just grew more and more feeble, and at last she took to her bed. She hadn't left it for a good many years, she couldn't take a step. I think it was something wrong with her spine, but I don't really know. But they got along all right? They did indeed. Of course Mr. Lancaster disliked her hoarding the gold, you know that, and Margaret was impatient sometimes. Her mother was rather fretful, especially in the summer. She fussed about her food, and Margaret was the housekeeper. But I think that's all. In other words, he said, the usual rather disagreeable old invalid. Well, she's gone, so we'll let her alone. Now, how did the others like Miss Emily? What about her? Anyhow? What sort of a life did she live? Try to think about her and make a real picture. Look back a bit. I found it very hard. She used to be rather pretty. When I was a little girl she was still pretty. Later on she had to sit with her mother so much that she got heavy.